Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the wonderful world of chess. I am your host, George Merijanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State College. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C-188 of the McKay Campus School at the college. And with me, once again, is my longtime colleague and trusty co-host, Martin Lane, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Well, Marty, today we're going to focus our attention on one of the greatest chess players in the history of the game. His name, Alexander Alekhine. Now, what do we know about Alexander Alekhine?
Well, Alekhine dominated the chess world, especially in the period between the two world wars. He was born in Russia to a wealthy family, rose to prominence as a chess player at a relatively early age, in his teens, I believe.
Yes, and his mother taught him the game.
Right.
Yeah, and in fact, his mother taught him and his brother, and also there was a sister that learned the game from the mother. So yeah, he actually learned the chess around the age of 10.
Right.
And he was playing correspondence chess by mail.
Right.
But it wasn't until around 16, around in his mid-teens, that he really became a strong, over-the-board player.
In Moscow.
Winning tournaments. Yeah.
Right.
So what happened, though?
Well, then in 1918, 1920, the time of the Russian Revolution, of course, his family lost most of what they had. He stayed in Russia for a time after that, though.
Yes.
Playing. Right. He did run afoul of the secret police at one point to Cheka.
Yes.
He was in prison, but he somehow was let go, and he continued to play. And then, at the time, he had married I believe she was a French woman.
Yes.
And so, under the kind of, she said they applied to leave so she could visit her family in France.
Right.
And so he was allowed to leave the Soviet Union at the time, and so they moved to Paris. He never went back to Russia after that.
And he did become a French citizen.
Yes. Right, and lived in Paris for a while. And he competed. He had a heavy playing schedule. He played a lot in that period between World War I and World War II. He seemed to me to be playing all the time. I mean, if you look at his tournament record, he didn't hold back at all. He was playing a lot, and he dominated. He dominated the chess world. Won the chess championship from Capablanca.
Yes, that was a celebrated match.
Right.
He beat the Cuban-born Jose Raul Capablanca in 1927 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And they thought Capablanca was invincible. I mean,
right.
no one thought that Alekhine would have a chance against the great Capablanca, but he did it in 1927. And now he won the title in 27, but then he had a match with a Dutchman, the Dutch master,
Dr. Max Euwe.
Max Euwe, and I think he may have taken either Max Euwe lightly, or I think they say because he was very fond to drink, Alekhine that is,
right.
He lost the match in 1935, and then he got his act together in 2 years later, and actually regained his title.
1937, right.
Exactly. Now, the game we're going to present to our viewers, Marty, was played a year after he had won the title back.
Right.
This is a game that he played in 1938 in Margate, England, which is a seaport, southeast England. But in 1938, we have an interview that was done by the BBC, an exclusive. This is the only recording of Alexander Alekhine that was done, and we've got it exclusively for our Chess Chat viewers. We'll be able to present the recording and show you a selection of graphics, photos of Alekhine during his career. So if we have our director, Darren Dane, start this interview that was done in 38. We don't know whether it was done before the game was played that we're going to present or after, but it was done that same year.
Right.
So let's see if we can roll that tape and show some photos and listen to the interview of Alexander Alekhine.
While dealing with the media is a regular part of the modern grandmaster's career, such was not always the case. In particular, voice recordings of the great players prior to the Second World War are very rare. While going through our archives, we came across a tape recording of a short interview with Alexander Alekhine. It is about 4 minutes long. As best we can determine, the interview was conducted for the BBC in 1938. We do not know who the interviewer was. We hope you enjoy Interview with Alexander Alekhine.
Now, Dr. Alekhine, tell me, would you say that chess players are born, or do you think a great chess player can be made by hard practice?
No, frankly, I think the ideal chess player is born. Of course, I look upon chess as an art, and just as you cannot make a great painter or a musician unless the gifts of painting or music are innate in a person, so also I believe that for anyone to become outstanding at chess, the ability must be born with the player. There is something much more in championship chess than just following the somewhat limited rules of a game. To play really good chess, you must have vision. Vision in something of the same way that a creative artist must have if he would lift his performance out of the common run.
Well, of course, as well as vision, I expect first-class chess needs a very well-trained memory too, doesn't it?
Oh no, that's where chess is just unlike bridge. One does not require an outstanding memory. Look forward all the time is the thing to do.
Sounds to me like the perfect game for optimists.
Yes, you may say so. I never look back on a game or a match, but try all the time to see how I may improve my play. Soon I shall have been playing little title chess for 30 years. I became chess master, you know, at 16.
16? That's amazing.
Yes, I won then the vase of the Tsar, which I still am keeping. I was allowed to bring it out. As a matter of fact, it was the only thing I was allowed to bring out of Russia in 1921 when I left it. But even my 30 years experience has not yet taught me all I should know of chess.
Well, I should have thought by now, Dr. Alekhine, that you must know all the answers, as they say.
Oh no, believe me, a lifetime is not enough in which to learn everything about chess. If it were, I should soon be getting ready to stop playing altogether. The technique, yes, that can be mastered. But there is always so much more to know about the actual art of the game. So, for instance, take my opponent in the last match, Dr. Earl. He's considered as being one of the outstanding experts in the opening play. And even being that, in our last match, in one game, he got a lost position after already 5 moves. So you see, every one of us has quite a lot to learn.
Yes, yes. Do you find that playing championship chess involves a great amount of mental stress?
Mental stress, no, but there is a nervous strain, and also physically one feels some effect. It is very necessary to prepare oneself physically for a contest, for as you must realize, the mind and brain are then key. For myself, I prepare always for a match by leading a quiet, healthy country life, and I relax, you may laugh, by playing ping pong. Yes, ping pong is just one of my biggest hobbies.
But you've no ambitions for the world ping pong title, have you?
Oh, not at all. I must concentrate, of course, in defending my chess title. And now soon I am off with my wife for South America to arrange for the next World's contest to be held there.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Alekhine, and all the best of luck.
Well, that was an interview by the BBC in 1938. This is the only recording of the great Alexander Alekhine that we have. And again, he was the 4th world champion. The first one was Wilhelm Steinitz, who was defeated by Emanuel Lasker, who in turn was defeated by Jose Raul Capablanca, and Alexander Alekhine dethroned Capablanca to become the 4th champion. Now, in the game we're going to present, let's say something about the opponent in this game that we're going to present.
Well, this game was played at Margate in 1938. Alekhine was white. His opponent was a prominent Finnish player by the name of Eero Berg. Several times, 6 or 7 times, a Finnish national champion. He represented the Finnish. He was on the Finnish chess Olympiad team 4 times or so. Wrote a number of books and articles about chess. Even though he wasn't a top world contender, he was a highly respected player on the international scene. In that period after World War I and up until probably about the 1960s or so. And so he was no slouch, a very prominent player. And they played on several occasions. In fact, in a tournament the year before in Kemery, Burke had a draw against Alekhine. So they were
the year before.
Yeah, the year before. So.
Okay. Well, let's present our viewers the game from Margate, 1938, and Alekhine's white. All right. So how did he start the game?
Okay. He took the pawn on d2 and opened with pawn to d4. A little different than what we've normally been seeing, but it serves the same purpose. It's a central pawn. It occupies a central square, opens a diagonal for the dark squared bishop, opens up space for the queen to move. A good opening move.
Okay. Well, Burke, on his move, there are actually 2 good moves against d4. One could play knight f6. That's a very good move. It prevents white from playing e4. But the equally good move is d5, which Burke played. He played d5, the pawn on d7, d5, which also prevents the advancement of the pawn to e4.
Right.
All right, so now it's Alekhine's second move.
Okay, and white would have a number of, it's still early in the game, there are a number of choices. Some players will develop the knight right away to f3. Others, might place the bishop out. Probably the more common move in this point is Alekhine takes the pawn on c2 and plays it to c4, called the Queen's Gambit.
So he's offering a pawn.
He's offering a pawn.
Okay. Now black has to make the decision. Does he accept the pawn that's offered, or does he decline it? Now, if he's going to decline it, there are only 2 good ways that black can decline it. It's either by moving the e-pawn to e6, which defends the pawn again, or the pawn on c7 to c6, which defends the pawn again. But what Burke did, he accepted the challenge of the gambit and took the pawn. So d takes c4 was his move.
Right.
All right.
So he's taken the pawn, and black's intention, he doesn't really plan to hold on to that pawn, but what I think the point is to try to develop some space on the queen's side. And white is in no rush to capture it. What he does is, since he's given up the pawn, the whole point of the gambit is to get your pieces out. Take advantage of that extra move and get into a position where your pieces are in an aggressive spot. So he develops his knight. The knight on g1 he plays to f3, developing his knight, attacking another central square, opening. It's a good second move.
All right. And also could be threatening e4.
Right.
See, e4 now is threatened. So what Burke plays is knight f6, which stops that, and also develops a piece to a very good square.
Okay. So white can't play he now can't play e4. It's prevented because the knight would just scoop it up. But he does play. He could play the bishop out if he wished. That would be one alternative. He could develop his other knight if he wanted. What he chooses to do is to take the pawn on e2 and play it to e3. Gives a little extra protection to the pawn on d4, but it also opens up the diagonal for the white squared bishop, so he can regain his pawn.
All right. So in response to e3, Burke plays e6, which is now going to open up for his dark squared bishop to come out.
Right.
It does shut in the white squared bishop, but it does allow that free movement of the dark squared bishop.
Okay.
So
Alekhine is now he's going to retake his pawn. He's going to regain that pawn that he gave up earlier. He does it. He's able to develop his bishop at the same time, so he gets his pawn back with a good move. So both players are scrambling to develop their pieces at this point.
All right. So Burke now on his 5th move plays c5. He plays c7 to c5, attacks the pawn on d4.
Right. Doesn't have to worry about the pawn being attacked. It's amply protected by the knight, by the other pawn, and by the queen. So he doesn't have to worry about the pawn being attacked. He could, if he wanted, play the knight to c3. He could do a few other things. Right. A hideous mistake would be to take the pawn. He doesn't want to exchange pawns here.
Because it will allow queen takes d1 check.
He'd have to recapture with the king, giving up the right to castle.
Exactly. And then that pawn could be taken immediately. Bishop takes c5.
Right. Black is ready to castle. White is stuck in the open.
Exactly. So that would be a mistake.
That would be a hideous mistake.
A big mistake. All right. So let's put the queens back and the pawn. So after c5, what does Alekhine do after c5?
Well, he follows the old rule of thumb. He's going to castle. He's going to get his king to safety. Brings the rook more towards the center where he can play it. It's a developing move. It's good and strong.
Okay. Well, Burke now develops the other knight. On b8 comes the c6. So knight c6 is his move. Gets the knight up, puts more pressure on the pawn on d4, but of course it's adequately defended.
It's adequately, and again, he doesn't have to worry about the pawn going because it is adequately defended. He could develop his knight out. He could do a prophylactic move, a preventative move, play something like that. What he chooses to do is an interesting sort of a positional move. He takes the queen and he plays the queen on d2. Actually takes one defender away and plays it to e2, but it's a strong move in a kind of a subtle way. First of all, it puts the queen on the same file as the king, so that if things start to open up, it could lead to an attack on the king. It also frees up the d1 square for the rook to come over and attack the queen, so that Black has to be very careful about any exchanges that take place at this point.
All right. So what Burke does in response, he plays a6. The pawn on a7, he plays a6, because he has a plan to start attacking on the queen side.
Right, that's the whole purpose of having accepted the gambit earlier. He wants to develop some space on the queen side.
That's where his play is.
So that's consistent with what he wants to do, right?
Okay, so after a6, what does Alekhine do here?
Well, he wants to develop his pieces. He looks at his rook, his knight, and his bishop, and they haven't moved anywhere. So he needs to get those out. If he wants to try to prevent any activity on the queen side, he's going to take the knight on b1 and play it to c3.
Okay. Burke now plays b5 and attacks the bishop on c4.
Right. So he's got to put the bishop somewhere.
Right.
Coming back here is a possibility, but it's not as helpful as trying to stay at least on this diagonal for a while.
Right.
He brings it back to b3.
Okay. Now here's an interesting footnote to this position here. It's Black's move, Burke's move. And would you believe that this position was played in Fitchburg 25 years after this game was played in a nationally rated tournament at the Unitarian Church at the Upper Common? It was the third Central New England Open Championship, and the player who had white was the master from Western Massachusetts, a multi-time champion of Western Massachusetts, right. And an armed forces champion was David Lees. You knew him.
I knew him and played him
him
a few times.
And he died in 1996. But in 1963, he played the dean of New England chess, John Curto, in Fitchburg, and they reached the same position.
Right.
What John Curto played in 1963 as Black, he played bishop b7. That was his move. Right. 25 years moves after this.
And ironically, Eero Burke, who's the player playing Black, had played that same move against the Swedish player Gideon Stahlberg in 1937, the year before the game we talked.
Aha. Yeah. So instead, what Burke played, he didn't repeat.
He didn't repeat that because he got crunched.
So he lost in 37 with this move. So in 38 in this game, he played b4, attacking the knight.
Right.
All right. So now what does Alekhine do?
Well, you sort of look at this and say, well, what can he do? Well, he can't move the knight here because it'll be taken. Can't move here because it'll be taken by the pawn. Can't go there because it's going to be taken by the pawn.
All right.
If he comes back, he's taking away a critical square from the rook there.
Okay.
And if he comes back to the b1, then he might as well have not moved it. So, so it makes no sense for him to try to, he could come out to a4, but it has no effect on anything.
Yes. Okay.
What he does is he has an effective and an aggressive counterplay. He attacks back. He plays the pawn on d4 to d5, attacking Black's
Okay.
knight.
All right. So Black now has the opportunity of taking here, but he chooses not to do that. He could have taken e takes d5, because that could be a little dangerous because the rook would still could move over
right,
to...
it pins it against the queen.
What he does, he chooses instead is he plays knight to a5, and now the knight on the side, the rim, which is dim, is now attacking the bishop.
It's attacking the bishop, threatening to double up the pawns here.
All right,
it's a plausible move.
All right, so what does Alekhine do after knight a5?
Well, his knight is attacked,
Yes.
But he's got some resources. He's going to take this bishop, and he's going to check the king from moving the bishop to a4, delivers check on the king.
All right. So what Burke does is just block. He has a bishop. He has a move.
Well, he doesn't want to move the king because he would forfeit castling.
Exactly.
So
He won't do that. That would be a very ugly move to move the king to e7. Instead, he just plays bishop d7, blocks that check.
Right.
All right. So what does Alekhine do now?
Well, now he's going to take advantage of the king's position and of his lead in development. He's going to play the pawn on d5 is now going to exchange and take the pawn on e6, attacking the bishop and threatening to take the f7 pawn with check.
Okay. And certainly he cannot take
Can't take it because it's pinned again.
All right. So what he does, he just simply plays f takes e6.
Right.
So he's recaptured the pawn.
Right.
Materially, it's even, but positionally, it's not looking too good for black.
Well, black's a little precarious, yeah.
Yes, all right.
So, Alekhine, now his knight is still hanging. The pawn is still threatening the knight.
Right.
But he decides he's going to add pressure on that bishop by playing rook to d1. Now the bishop can't take the bishop here because he would lose his queen.
All right, so he's actually offering a sacrifice.
He's offering a sacrifice. He's
All
going
right.
to give up a whole piece here.
And this is what Burke did. He accepted the sacrifice. He took the pawn on b4, now captures on c3. So b takes c3, and he wins the knight.
Right. So now
sacrifice.
So now Alekhine's down what we call a minor piece. We regard the bishops and knights as minors.
Okay.
And he doesn't bother with recapturing the pawn. In fact, he grabs the bishop on d7 with his rook, threatening the queen.
Okay. Attacks the queen, and again that pin is still there.
There.
So what Burke does is recapture with the knight.
Yeah,
He's got a
there's
knight
no
on
choice.
f6.
He pretty much
He has to.
Yeah.
He has to play knight takes d7. So he's got things. He's still pinned now.
But now, instead of being down a minor piece, he's down in a whole rook, a major piece.
Yes, he sacrificed that.
Okay, but that knight is pinned.
All right. So how does Alekhine continue?
Well, in a situation like this, you have to keep adding. If this is going to work, you have to keep finding ways to add pressure on your opponent. We see these in the games of Morphy and some of the others. We see this sort of theme happening. He takes the knight on f3, and he plays it to e5, adding an attack to the...
So we have two pieces attacking
attacking
this
that.
knight,
Right.
and he's threatening now to take here.
Right.
Regaining that. So what Burke does, he has this rook on a8, which very conveniently can go to a7. Right. Rook a7 comes up and now adds further protection on the knight on d7. All right, so Alekhine continues.
Well,
how?
I just said that, you have to look for ways to add pressure. Alekhine makes an interesting decision. Now he decides he's just going to retake that pawn. But it's really fairly clever because it prevents any counterplay that might be built around that pawn. It also opens up a little bit more space for that bishop if he needs it.
Right.
And so he played the pawn on b2, took the pawn on c3.
All right. Well, now comes a key point in the game. What Burke played here, well, actually, what he should have played. Let's point out to our viewers what he himself. Did you not tell me that the day after this game was played that Burke actually analyzed this game and came up with what conclusion?
Well, there's an interesting anecdote. It was written by a British player named Harry Gollenbeck, very prominent British player who played in this tournament. And he says that after this game, Burke and Alekhine sat through and went through the variations. And first, Alekhine showed a line that he would have played had Burke played some certain lines, and it looked like it was a clear win from this position no matter what Burke did. I mean, Alekhine's initial analysis was that this was a one game from this point on.
Right.
A day later, Burke came back and showed them that he had worked out a way that black could win this game.
All right.
And then bishop to e7
So bishop e7 was the recommended move.
Not the move in the game.
All right. Well,
and it leads to queen to h5 would be a check, and then there would be a block and so on.
All right. So
but that would hold the game for black.
Okay, so what he played instead, though,
right?
He played king e7, getting off this pin.
He wants to relieve
All
the
right,
pin.
let's continue with this game.
So Alekhine plays the pawn on e3 to e4, opening up the diagonal.
Yep.
Now he's threatening to check.
Well, actually, yeah. If you can eliminate this knight first, take here, because this knight would be in a position.
Right.
All right. So I can see the threat now is to eliminate this blocker and play the bishop g5, which would check the king and actually win the queen.
Right.
All right. So what he does in this position after e4, he plays immediately
block,
the block, yeah,
right.
to stop that check.
Alekhine develops his bishop by pinning that knight against the king. He
All
plays
right.
bishop to g5.
All right. Now, what Burke does in response is play queen c7, which now doesn't it attack this
attacks
knight
the knight.
on e5?
So what Alekhine does is he says, okay, I'm going to move the bishop back to f4, not only defending the knight, but threatening to win the queen by playing knight to g6 check, and then winning the queen.
Right, exactly. So what Burke has to do against that is move that queen.
He's gotta get it out of the way.
That queen is in the line of fire.
Right.
So what he does, he plays queen to b6. All right, so now he's safe
Right.
because...
And now he's going to take advantage of this d1 square. He's going to play the rook to d1,
right. All right.
threatening a check here or whatever.
Okay. Well, what the Burke does, he plays. See this poor little. Look at this poor
It's stuck
bishop.
there, right.
Stuck. All right. So he needs to activate this bishop, and utilize it for defensive purposes. He plays g6.
Right.
So they can bring that bishop to
So
g7
goes
eventually.
back. Now that the knight is not threatened, he comes back
He comes
and
back.
repins.
Oh, so he
the bishop.
repins the knight
Right.
that he had pinned earlier.
Right.
All right. So what Burke does, he plays bishop g7. Now he's defending that
Right.
knight.
Well, and now not only is Alekhine going to attack that knight, he's going to attack the queen as well.
Okay. Now
The
we
knight's
have.
protected by the bishop and the rook. It's attacking the queen, attacking the other knight.
All right, so this is actually looking very ugly for black here. So what Burke did after knight d7, well, he just captured, he has a rook on a7,
Right.
which captures the knight on d7, which allows Alekhine to do what, though?
Well, he plays take rook on d7 with check. It's defended by the bishop. The knight is pinned against the king, so it can't take it. The king has to move. There's nothing else he can do.
And there are only 2 squares for this king. But he certainly is not going to go to e8, because this would lose...
Well, because he would just simply move the rook, attack the queen, checking the king.
and
losing
lose the queen. So
Right.
that would be...
That doesn't work.
All right, so the only square he has after
Can't
this
go up,
check
yeah.
is he has to go king f8.
Right.
That's the only square he has.
Right.
All right, so how do we continue here?
Now he takes the bishop, takes the knight on f6.
Bishop takes f6.
F6.
And what Burke does, he just responds with bishop takes f6. Remember, he is still a piece ahead.
It's a
minor
full piece ahead.
Full piece ahead. However, this position
Now
is...
Alekhine plays pawn to e5, attacking the bishop, and Burke resigned.
Now, why did Burke resign? Why cannot Burke just move that bishop?
Well, where's he going to move it to?
Well, let's say... Well,
Moves it anywhere.
all right, okay. Let's look at all the possibilities. The bishop... Say the bishop would have come back to g7. Well, how would the
Queen to
queen
f3.
f3,
Check.
and there's only 2 squares for that king,
Right.
and if he goes either to e8,
Then the queen comes down to f7. Checkmate.
which would also apply to if he went
other
to g8.
square, right.
All right, so he can't do that. And what would happen if he, on this, this queen is, where is this queen now?
It was on e3.
Okay, so what if the bishop actually went here? Say the bishop went here, try to hide here. All right, so now could the queen still go to f3?
Could still go to f3. Check.
Okay, and now the king, well, let's say, for example, let's say the king goes here. That would be I'm going to present a bad move scenario.
Well, it still opens up
for the
check.
queen, the check. All right. So what happens if we run the other way? Can we run the other way? Is this bad?
Well, let's see, what could he do here?
Well, actually, what he could do...
take the bishop.
He could take the bishop and still threaten...
He could also come down here, but
Yes, he could. But even taking here...
taking the bishop
And
first,
actually, that
that
would
leaves
actually
me-
be...
yeah.
So we can understand in this position, is this the position that in this position after e5, he resigned?
right, he resigned.
And with justification. But as you pointed out, that Burke analyzed this, and again, he was very, you say he was an amateur, but he was a professional in his thought process.
Right.
Well, I hope you chess fans enjoyed the game that Marty I presented by one of the greatest players, whoever was world champion. By the way, Marty, he was the only world champion who ever held that title until his death.
Right.
He maintained that title. He died in 1946, March 1946, tragically, and his likes we'll never see again. He was a brilliant tactician, imaginative, creative. We'll see you next time on Chess Chat.